Today, we want to share the most common challenges that field leaders around the world are facing and show why most of them actually point back to just 3 core issues. We'll start with a ranked list of challenges and then step back and look at a deeper pattern underneath them, and finally, talk about what actually helps. This goes back to some research that my wife and I did in the fall of 2025, where we visited 4 different countries, 2 in the Middle East and 2 in Southeast Asia, 9 different cities. We sat down and talked with 76 different leaders from almost 30 different organizations, and we put a little microphone on and recorded conversations with 35 leaders. And then we actually, over the internet, got a couple more recordings in, so 37 leaders. And we took that and we fed it into AI, and we asked it to help us analyze the major challenges that field leaders around the world are facing. Today, we want to unpack that for you. So we're going to talk with our co-host, Scott Lundy, who serves in the Middle East and has been there, I believe, almost 13 years now and coaches others. And he's had a chance to dive into the research findings himself, and we've interacted over it. And so we want to just together kind of unpack those for you today. We'll do a countdown of the top 15 from number 15 to number 1, the most frequently mentioned challenge that field leaders face.
Yeah, Bob, and I'm looking forward because with the research and looking over it, it's been across different contexts, and that matters because it really takes out the uniqueness of maybe talking to, if you have people from different orgs but all one country, well, that country may have some unique challenges. Or if you just talk to one org, that org may have unique challenges. Or if you're just dealing in, let's say, people in the Buddhist world, well, there may be some things you're missing from the Muslim or Hindu world. So it's listening across multiple contexts really matters. And one of the reasons we're highlighting these things is because there's some shared challenges. And that's really significant because our broader audience is all over the world.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to listen before offering solutions. It's like we may be trying to solve problems that we just see in our little narrow world, but talking to multiple orgs, multiple contexts, countries, multiple faith systems that people are working in really helps us to get the broader picture of what's the common things that everybody's facing.
Right. And they really are common. You know, you might think you're in a unique situation, but honestly, it really boils down to just a few issues. So with that context, let's walk through what leaders actually told us, starting with the least mentioned challenges and working toward the most common. But I want to say this. This is the list that was produced through the AI analysis, but I'm also bringing in, and we'll be sharing some perspectives from talking to the 76. Some things that may show up not mentioned that much in the actual recordings were talked about a lot in other contexts. Yeah. For example, the first one, the number 15 on our list, the least frequently mentioned, was the balance between work and family. And I'll tell you, that wasn't a little challenge. Even though it was the least frequently mentioned in the recordings, that's a common challenge that all workers face. And so it doesn't mean it's unimportant. And you'll see how it really fits into a larger bucket as we go through.
Yep. Yeah, number 14 was navigating institutional or home office demands. This could be things like reporting or expectations, dealing with policies, or just distance from the field. Bob, what's next?
Number 13, cross-cultural partnership challenges. Not only are you working half a world away from your home country, but you're really working across cultures, and those always bring challenges.
Yeah, number 12 is pressure for results and lack of fruit. We may talk a bit about how a lot of this may be internal later on, but that's really about fruitfulness versus faithfulness and looking at metrics, what are questions being asked by supporters. So just in general, pressure for results and the lack of fruit.
Yeah, I know I've seen with my own self that I've caught myself at times feeling pressure for results. And when I've stopped and asked, am I really hearing this from supervisors? Or are my supporters really demanding results? And honestly, it's more internal than it is external. And that's a trap we fall into. And so it's important to call it what it is, because then we can relax and realize so much of it's just in God's hands.
Yep.
We don't need to be stressing ourselves out. Number 11, onboarding and leading new workers. You know, you're already stretched thin, you're trying to do the work, and then you add a new person to your team. That can be a real challenge because you kind of have to back up the boat and say, hey, let's talk about vision and values all over again. And there's a lot of orientation work and things. So that presented a challenge really in many different contexts.
Yep. Number 10 was leading multicultural or intergenerational teams. This is really about, a lot of times it's about value differences, not just cultural differences. So multicultural or intergenerational teams and the challenges with that was number 10.
Yeah. Coming in at number 9 was the leader's emotional and spiritual health. Weariness, discouragement, the inner life. I think you'll see later that this is not really a number 9, that it's a hugely important one.
Yep. Number 8 was team instability, or what we may call churn. So that's what we're talking about with attrition and turnover, not just of team members, but sometimes we're actually seeing leadership transitions and turnovers. So just team instability would be number 8.
Yeah. Number 7, managing unmet or unrealistic expectations. And that can be from team members, it could be from supporters, it could be from your organization, but managing those unmet or unrealistic expectations. You know, I heard a comedian this week say that happiness is your current circumstances minus your expectations. So, you know, that's not always true, but honestly, expectations can be joy and peace killers. And so it's important to mention that those exist and for us to look at them honestly.
Yeah. Number 6 was time management and busyness and things that could lead to burnout. So this is about pace of work or lack of margin in someone's life.
Going into the top 5 most frequently mentioned challenges now. So number 5, inadequate leader training and competency. So many of the leaders felt like they were kind of asked to be in the role without the preparation that they needed. Maybe their team leader left unexpectedly or something happened and they just felt like, I haven't had the training and I don't feel competent for this. And so that was a challenge.
Yep. And number 4 was the tension between leading versus doing. And what we mean by that is the pull between maybe frontline ministry, like going out and doing it yourself because you really feel a passion to reach the locals, versus the leadership responsibility of leading a team. And so there's a tension between leading others that are doing it and how much time you spend doing it yourself.
Yeah. Number 3, the leader's loneliness and isolation, this feeling of just being alone. And that can be vocational, relational, emotional, just a sense of, you know, I can't really share. I'm really not connected to other people.
Yeah. And number 2, you might have thought this was going to be number 1 if you ever studied the Reducing Missionary Attrition Project. Team conflict and unhealthy team dynamics. So I think we all know that's about, lack of unity, mistrust, unresolved conflict. So that was actually number 2 from our research.
Okay, drum roll. Number 1, the most frequently mentioned was a lack of mentorship, coaching, or peer support. A lot of times leaders just felt like they needed some guidance, they needed encouragement, they needed sounding boards, and they didn't have that. And so that's a lot. That's a lot to just drop 15 different challenges. Yep. But I think you'll see here in just a second, as we looked at those and we saw some commonalities between some of them, and we realized, you know what? There were really 3 main buckets that all of these 15 challenges could fall into. And so we're going to spend the rest of our time kind of talking about those buckets and offering some solutions, at least one, to how you can move forward and strengthen your leadership.
Yeah, Bob, when we stepped back and asked, what's underneath these challenges, the 3 major patterns emerged in what we might call the 3 buckets, because it was very clear. Number 1, and we actually have a graphic if you look at it. If you're watching this on video, you'll be able to see the graphic we put up. But the 3 clear buckets are, number 1, overwhelming demands of the job. Number 2, team-related issues. And number 3 was the leader's internal landscape coupled with inadequate support systems. So those would be the 3 clear buckets that everything kind of fell into.
Yeah, that's right. And so this bucket of the job being too much, there's too much to be done, that was mentioned 17 different times when you look at the 15 different challenges that we just outlined for you, we should mention that leaders were asked to give us the top 2 or 3 challenges that they have seen. And so that's why our total is going to be more than 37 answers from 37 recordings, because people were offering their top 2 or 3 challenges. And so this, when we went back and looked at and said, you know what, balancing work and family is really pretty much the same as when they said time management, busyness, burnout, those. So we grouped those questions together. Or feeling the pressure for results, like we don't have enough time to produce these. That's really a sense of the overwhelming demands of the job. And so that's what we did. We grouped some of these ones that were really hinting at the same core underlying issues together. And there were 17 of them that fell into this bucket.
And Bob, when I left the marketplace and went into the ministry, in 2001, I can think back to that time when we had someone on the field who was a field leader, and he was struggling between how to manage some family challenges, legit challenges and responsibilities he had, but also how to lead his team in the midst of all that was going on. So quite a bit of tension for that as well.
Yeah. And, these people were hard workers. They were committed. This wasn't lazy people with poor discipline. This was actually, when you think about the demands of the job, you think about, okay, as a team leader, you're responsible for recruiting new people to your team. Well, when you have a lot of turnover, you have to constantly be doing that. But then your heart's really to be involved with nationals, your cross-cultural partners, and you want to be doing that. And then you need to meet the demands of the home office and do the paperwork and the reports. And then you need to resolve conflict. And so it can just be way too much. And we'll talk about some solutions in a little while, but it's definitely an issue.
I'm sure we can all think of, if you're listening to this podcast, you're most likely thinking, oh, wow, that really relates to me. And so, like I said, we're going to cover some possible solutions here as we get towards the end of the podcast.
Yeah. Let's go on to bucket number 2, team issues. This is probably not a surprise to anyone, but the challenges were things like team conflict and dynamics, managing unmet expectations, team churn and instability, onboarding new workers, multicultural, intergenerational team issues, home office and cross-cultural partnerships. All of those fell into this bucket because they really dealt with the issue of working as a team and the conflict that can come up or the challenges that are related. And so 32 of the responses fell into this team issue bucket.
Yep. And what's interesting, Bob, is that while you may have a team of people and they're all having issues, the leader will probably be more drained because they feel these pressure disproportionately than the team members. Because there's a responsibility. There's a load that they're having to carry.
Yeah.
And they're having to carry the load for the whole team. Whereas if you may have 2 or 3 people over here that are having issues, the leader's responsible, but yet these people that may be independent don't have to deal with that, but they're having their own issues. So the leader just has a lot more burden bearing. I have one good friend, one of his mentors told him, he says, leadership is really about burden bearing. And you've got to carry the burden of the team that you're leading.
Yeah. And it costs time too.
Yeah.
And it takes time to work through things, and it costs time to go get alone with the Lord and pray about it. And all these things are just extra time taxers to the leader. But boy, when you get a team working well and the Holy Spirit is empowering everybody and you're working, man, like it says in Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than 1. You get a team that are not easily broken. And Jesus built a team of disciples who could carry on the work. And Paul recruited a team, and the Holy Spirit didn't say, just give me Paul. He's give me Paul and Barnabas. And, there's so many ways that God lives in community and wants us to live in community and work in teams. And so we can't give up on team just because it's hard, because it's beautiful when it is working and clicking on all cylinders, not just for the fruitfulness of it, but for the enjoyment of doing life with a team. Boy, those are some of the best memories in my life, is the times that I've really been living in community, doing ministry with a team. What sweet times. Yeah. And so leaders, we know it's hard. We know it showed up 32 different times in your mentions, but don't give up. It is worth it.
Yeah.
So that brings us to bucket number 3. Scott, why don't you take us into that one?
Well, bucket number 3 is the leader's internal state, coupled with the lack of mentors and inadequate support systems. And the challenges that feed into this bucket would be the things that we mentioned about leader loneliness and isolation. It would also include inadequate training and competency issues, also the emotional and spiritual health struggles. And all of this also falls into the number one thing that was mentioned was lack of mentoring, coaching, and peer support. So all that kind of feeds into the leader's internal state.
Yeah, I really see that connection between the leader's internal state and, with things like loneliness and feeling of isolation and getting, maybe feeling empty or burned out, those kind of things. I really see the connection between those and a lack of peer support or mentorship. Scott, I know you've seen this kind of thing on the field a good bit.
Well, I mean, there was a regional leadership team in a particular country, and two of the other leaders had been there for decades, kind of the status quo, don't rock the boat. And they were more focused earlier about leading versus doing. They very much wanted to do, but because they've been around for decades, they were on the core leadership team. And this leader had been around maybe 10 years, got on the leadership team, and really wanted to try to, hey, let's make things healthier. Let's bring changes and resolving conflict. But they didn't have anybody to talk to. They felt isolated and alone because they couldn't talk to other people in the community because they didn't want to talk bad about the people in the conflict. And they were uncomfortable talking to their boss when there's this leadership team they're supposed to work with. So, it's very common, I think, for leaders to feel like they need to talk to someone, but they don't feel safe or don't feel like they can be vulnerable. And that's where mentoring and coaching and having peers you can talk to in a safe place really can help.
Yeah. And when you don't have that help, every challenge just feels heavier. You're bearing the weight of it yourself. And it kind of creates a vicious cycle here. And so let's look at our three buckets here. We had the three buckets of the leader's internal state. Yep. That's the one that had the most frequent responses fall into it, 37. And then we had team issues. That was 32 responses fell into that one. And then our third one of just feeling overwhelmed with work. The demands of work are too high. And when there's a problem with one of those, it really cascades and causes a problem with the others, and then it's a cycle.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Bob, we got an image here that if you're watching, you can see that up top is the overwhelming workload, and then the cycle goes to the leader's internal state. We kind of mentioned in their burnout, because if you can eventually lead to burnout, and then you got team issues. And it doesn't matter where you enter the cycle. It's not like it's all going to always start with overwhelming workload, but you can get into team issues, which then can lead into the workload and crisis management and conflict resolution, all that stuff. And so it just begins to cycle around and around and around.
Yeah. The leader's internal state.
Yeah.
This isn't just in the ministry world. I see this in conversations I have with people all the time in the business world as well. Whenever there's leadership, I was talking with someone who was in a C-suite of a publicly owned company this week and talking with him about the challenges that he was facing because of the CEO of his company. And as I heard him unpack the actions of the CEO, and I stopped and I said, you know what? So much of what this guy's doing is obviously coming from his insecurities and also his ego and things going on in his heart. And a lot of times we think, well, your leadership stuff, that's one issue, and what's going on in your heart, it's a different issue. And it's like, no, most bad leadership flows right out of your heart into the team and causes team conflict, which then causes more work and more overload. And it really can start at any one of these buckets, and it can be a vicious cycle. Yeah.
Bob, as we talk about the vicious cycle, a key insight in trying to break the cycle is that most leaders don't need more effort. What they need is an interruption to the cycle. Plenty of workers are putting in tons of effort, but there's something in the cycle that's not working, and so they need a break or an interruption.
Yeah, somehow some external force that helps us with that, or maybe it's a personal retreat or something, but we need some interruption. Yeah, Scott, that's a good insight. And I think that really points us to our next section we want to talk about, and that's the support structures that can be so helpful to leaders. I really think there are 4 key support structures that all of us need, and we'll dive into each one of those, but let's just name them at first. I think the first is all of us need a champion team, and that's a team of people who maybe a little older or more experienced, because you can't be 30 and 60 at the same time. All of us could benefit from someone that's a little further ahead of us, a mentor, coaches. That's a great team. But it's also helpful to have people who are on the ground with you and they know local information, who are in the same job as you, not one that they had, 20 years ago, but one that they have right now. It can be really helpful to be in a peer group. And a third support system is a gospel community where you're really connecting at a heart level, being authentic and supporting each other. And then the fourth is the support structure of shared leadership. And we'll dive into that here in just a minute. But let's talk about the champion team and what that can look like. And so, Scott, how have you seen champion teams play a role in your life or the life of those that you coach, and what difference has it made?
Yeah, so I have cases or examples from both. The last several years, I've done a lot more of the mentoring and coaching of younger people in the field. I'll give you an example. A guy that was under my leadership had come to the field. He'd been on the field about 3 months, and so I just said, hey, and we were already meeting weekly, but I was kind of like, let's do a little debrief. It's been 3 months. Let's do a little check-in, and so I'm asking general questions, but then I'm just like, what's the state of your heart? What are you stressed about? What's got you anxious? Really or how you adjust into culture. And the biggest thing that came up for him was this pressure. One of the things we talked about is fruitfulness and results, or faithfulness, and the pressure to have results. And his biggest thing was, he was out sharing the gospel. He says, I feel like a failure. I'm not sharing the gospel enough. And we won't go into all the details about what he was doing, but it all boiled down to, he's like, I've been stateside reaching the Muslims in my community, been doing that for years. I raised all this support, and I got to have a good story in my newsletter because now I'm here supposed to be doing it. And I'm kind of like, wait, you're 3 months into language. How are you going to share the gospel effectively with someone when at this level of language and you don't know the culture? So I really had to walk him through taking that pressure that turned out to be internal pressure. The people back home, right. His sending org, nobody's putting him on pressure to be leading people to faith within 3 months in learning Arabic, which is one of the harder languages to learn coming from an English background. So that's one example for an individual. I was working with I won't quite call it a fellowship or church, but a community had about 100 to 120 people involved in the work. And the leadership realized we need more help. We need our core leadership team, and they also was 6 foreigners. And like, for this thing to really grow, we need at least have an equal number of locals. So they began to bring on locals, and what that led to was a lot of conflict. And they were like, "What's going on? We think there's a cultural issue." And so they were able to bring me in to help them think through some intercultural intelligence stuff and really help them create a third culture within their team, which they had no clue. They couldn't see it. These are good people, but something's not connecting. And so I was able to come in and give them frameworks to see cultural issues. Yeah. And so that's just a few examples. But one thing that really helped me was a few years ago, and I've struggled with depression at different times in my life, and I came through a season and I was just struggling. And so I talked to my supervisor and said, hey, I'm getting a little worried that I may be getting depressed. And my supervisor was like, hey, Scott, that's smart. One, thanks for being vulnerable and safe. But it's interesting to see you do a self-diagnosis, which is also good to be thinking. But I want you to go talk to this counselor who I'd seen in the past and says, see what he says. He's he's a professional. So turns out what I had was not depression. What I had was burnout and grief. And you treat grief and burnout very differently than you do depression. But when you put them together, it looked a lot like depression. But there's really, so it was getting to the root of the real problem, but just thinking it was a different problem. And so that's just having champions in my life helped me through some things that really helped me move out of that challenging season.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm thinking about some of our listeners aren't team leaders. Some of them are actually coaches of team leaders, or your organization may call them, you may be an area leader or a team leader overseer, or whatever terminology you use. I played that role for team leaders in 4 different countries at one time. And when I stop and reflect back on that time, I see one big mistake I believe I made. It was kind of an epiphany one day. I thought, you know what? I tried to be everything that each one of those leaders needed. I tried to be a mentor, a coach. I tried to do care for them. I tried to, be their friend. I tried to do everything for them. And I just realized, you know what? I'm not a whole body of Christ. I don't have all the gifts. I should have been playing more of a role of quarterback where I was bringing in different people who were better at some of the aspects and the meeting the needs that those leaders had. And so this champion team, not just a champion, but we'd love to see leaders have champion teams in their lives. And so if you are fulfilling the responsibility of coaching someone, who could you bring alongside you? Who does some things better than you that could help you? Maybe you could play the role of quarterback and bring even more support to the leaders that you're leading. And just one biblical example, I think of this we see with Moses and Jethro. Think about Moses was in the middle of leading, and he was just being worn out, and the people were getting dissatisfied because he wasn't meeting all the needs. And he really needed an outside voice to come in, and his father-in-law Jethro, and kind of break the cycle and say, hey, what you're doing's not good. You need to get some people that you can share this load with, and that was a really important time, I think, for the whole Commonwealth of Israel right then, to have this one outside person who benefited their leader, and then everybody benefited. And so a champion team can be invaluable.
Right.
But also our peer groups, having others who are kind of in it with us. We don't always have access to our mentors and coaches all the time, but if we can also have another support system, another group of people who are peers that we can bounce things off of, we can spend time with, that can be super valuable.
Yeah. Bob, a lot of times you'll have either within orgs, like the team leaders may come together and have a meeting periodically. I know in our region, in at least one country, they have a coalition where leaders from the different orgs come together for a luncheon about 8 times a year, where they'll talk about any specific needs that are going on, or, hey, there's some trainings coming up if your people need this, or there's sharing of resources. But sometimes, hey, the visa rules are changing. What's happening here? Or what are we going to do about this safety issue, when the sirens go off? And what is your team doing for evacuation? It's like, you don't have to figure it all out. You can learn from others.
Yes.
Through just having peers that are in similar contexts or a similar season as you.
Yeah. And the business world has figured this out. They may not call them peer groups. They might call them mastermind groups or these type of things, but where they want to make money.
Yep.
And so, like, if I can get together with some other people who are making money and learn from them, why wouldn't I, And so I think we need to have that attitude of, hey, I'll learn from anybody I can. Let's get together.
Yep.
And I think about one gentleman who was in his 50s, and he'd been doing church planting for over 20 years, and he told me he wanted to find a mentor. And I thought, bro, you need to be a mentor. I don't know if we have that many Yodas to go around, but if you could at least find some peers to meet with, they could really be encouraging and helpful to you. And so we at Missio Nexus could actually help those of you who would like to perhaps get into some cross-organizational peer groups, because that can be gold.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, when you can talk with someone who's outside of the people that you talk to regularly within your own organization, but if you can say, hey, how do you guys in your organization handle that? What are you learning? And so we will put a link in the podcast description where you can contact us, and you can just say, hey, I'm interested in finding out more about how I could be in a field leaders peer group that's across organizations. So let's review for just a second. In our support structures, we talked about having a support structure of a champion team, and secondly, of a peer group, and thirdly, we need a gospel community. And this is a group where you really connect at a heart level with people, where you feel safe and you can be authentic. We have our first season of the Field Leaders Podcast is about gospel communities, and we dedicated that whole season to talking about them because I believe when you look at things like the leader's internal state not being great, or you look at team conflict and these things, I think a lot of that could be prevented if the leaders were experiencing gospel community where they could be real and honest and have people speak in and pray and with them on a regular basis and tend each other's hearts.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep your heart healthy all by yourself. The scriptures teach us to help each other keep our hearts healthy. And so a gospel community is a safe place that you can do that. And so, Scott, you were sharing with me the way that you experienced the help of a gospel community over this last year. I'd love for you to share that with others.
Yeah, well, for me, the gospel community benefit is I noticed the beginning of last year, I was having a lot of conflict and stress and anxiety in my life. And I was going through my journal and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And it was probably April or May. At some point, I realized most of my angst and stuff that I was journaling about, I was like, I'm the common thread. So what's wrong with me? And then, but I started looking at, oh, wait a minute. The common thread with all these different people is they're ENFPs. I'm an ISTJ. And there's a personality conflict. It's not
now. If someone's not familiar, with those letters, real quick, what are those letters?
Well, they're from the Myers-Briggs personality type. So ENFPs, they're extroverted, they're intuitive thinking, or intuitive data receiving. When they make decisions, they're feelers, they do that. And then the perceivers is they like to keep their options open. Whereas an ISTJ, I'm introverted. I'm like, give me the facts. I'm going to make decisions more with what I think than I feel. And I want to bring a closure and bring the decision versus. So it's kind of the exact opposite. Yeah. And so I'm having a revelation of like, oh, it's not that they're sinning against me or they're accusing me of sin. It's like God has made us differently. And so it helped me in talking to others in my gospel community about how can I, as an ISTJ, love them well and communicate. So I was able to do that with others who, helped me process some of the challenges I was going through. And I mean, the second half of my year was significantly different.
Yeah, that's good. I just want to point out that sometimes our gospel community can be the same as our peer group. Yeah. We might meet with a group of peers regularly, and they might function as that for us. Right. Sometimes our gospel community is our own team, and we can get most of our gospel communities met there. There are times where we might have a challenge with somebody on our team, and it's good to have a safe place to be able to process that outside of your team. I think the more the better, the more support you can receive, the better, because it's a challenging job. Yeah. So let's go to the fourth support structure I believe we all need, and that is shared leadership. And I'll just start off with a confession. I think for years, I thought, shared leadership meant I lead this team of leaders and they lead their teams, and we're sharing leadership that way. That's one way that we share leadership is kind of through a hierarchical leading and responding. But again, I'm not the whole body of Christ. And if this job is bigger than any one person can do, and one of the big buckets was leaders sharing how they just felt like there was too much, boy, you need to share that burden with others. You need to ask some of the people on your team to help with some of those things. And so, Scott, you've mentioned about how you found that was really helpful when you did that with the area of care in one of the groups you were leading.
Yeah, some years ago, I was leading I don't know if you call them a language team or equipping team. It's basically for people's first 2 years on the field when they're learning language and culture and going through all those challenges. And starting that, I knew when I think about lead developing and caring for people, that care takes the most energy out of me. It just drains me. And so I knew that was going to be my limiting factor. And so I began to think and pray, it's like, you know what? In the Ephesians 4, 11 and 12, there's different gifts. There's the gift of the shepherd. So I began to look for people in our community. I just started asking, who do you know that's a good shepherd? Who has the gift of shepherding? And then I would go and try to recruit them, cast vision for what I'm doing, and so they would help. They were kind of like the front line for care issues because at our peak, I had 23 people in our community, and there's just no way I could care for that many people personally or even in we had it broken down. Again, shared leadership. We broke it into 3 groups. And so it's kind of like you mentioned earlier with Jethro coming to visit Moses. That's what Jethro did. He says, you can't do this alone. It's going to wear yourself and these people out. So delegate the work.
Yeah. And I got to imagine that there are some other leaders out there that fall into the traps I've caught myself in over the years. And so I want to just share a couple of those and in this area. One of them is, and I'll go back to there was a time when someone said, "What's your greatest strength, Bob?" And instead of just telling, "Oh, my spiritual gifts are this," or whatever, I actually, sat back and thought for a bit. And I said, "You know what? I think my greatest strength is I'm the jack of all trades, master of none." And, I don't know if there's any particular thing that I'm the best at, but I think the fact that I can do a lot of things okay, I think that's a role that some people need to play. You kind of have this person that can do a lot of things pretty well. Here's how it becomes a trap. As a leader, when you look at what needs to be done and you think, "Oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do that," it sucks you in and you end up doing it, things that you ought to be handing off and delegating. That's one. Now, if you compound that with an experience gap, let's imagine that you've had more experience in doing it than the people on your team have had. And so not only can you do these things, you're looking at them, well, they don't have much experience in doing this. Well, here's why it's such a trap, because if you don't delegate it to them, number one, they're not going to be able to gain the experience and become better at it. Number two, if you're doing it, you're not giving your think and prayer time to leading the team because you're doing one of the functions of the team. You need to rise up and think big picture and lead the team. And so all of us need to see, where am I not sharing leadership? Where could I share leadership more? And see it not as, well, things won't get done as well, but as a developmental opportunity of other leaders and a way to empower us to have more space to do what only we can do to lead the team at a higher level. And so I think these 4 support structures, having a champion team of mentors and coaches, a peer group, a gospel community, and a shared leadership, that can provide, the ability for a leader to stay healthy and to break out of or stay out of this vicious cycle of overwork causing a bad internal state, which causes team dysfunction, which causes overwork. And these are very helpful, and they can help with 2 of the buckets. The buckets of there being too much work to do when you start sharing leadership, you start getting counsel on how to do work better, more efficiently from peers and all that. That's all super helpful. It also helps our internal state stay good. And it can help as you get counsel on team issues. It can help you see different perspectives about how to better navigate those team challenges. But the whole thing of team and team formation and team working, boy, that can be so complex that we're going to dedicate a whole season. We're going to turn, this season is kind of focused on the leader. We're going to turn our focus in the next season to team and how do we form teams in a better way? How do we build teams in a better way? How do we work through these things so that we really get the synergy we want? And so I'm looking forward to jumping into that season sometime real soon.
Yeah, Bob. And, one of the things when we talk about the 4 support structures and how to break the cycle is there tends to be a normalization or resistance to change. And sometimes the excuse is, I'm too busy. I'll give you an example. I've got a dear friend who I've also done some coaching with, working in a socioeconomically depressed, working with refugees, and they work in a medical clinic, and they're a medical professional. And it was like, because they go off and do visits, all the locals have this person's phone number. So they contact this medical professional at all hours of the night, 7 days a week. And so I was like, look, don't you think you ought to have one phone for work and one phone for your personal life, your team stuff, and then you can turn this off at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever. And so they agreed. They bought a second phone. They got a second phone number, but they were too busy, set up WhatsApp, Signal, email on their new phone, tell all their friends they're changing numbers. So they've got this second phone, and they haven't made the switch. They've just been too busy. And so it's hard. And it's kind of like if you have cancer, but you say, well, I don't have time to go get the chemo treatments. It's like, you can only go so far as an external help to someone if they're not willing to slow down and take the time to figure out how can this cycle be interrupted.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because as we were out talking to all these different leaders and hearing these challenges, we also heard simultaneously, we're so busy, we don't know if we could commit to this or that, a support group. We don't know if we could come to a getaway for our hearts or whatever. And wait, you can't have it both ways. You can't, on one side, be screaming, this is too much, we need help. And at the same time say, I'm too busy to get help. And so leaders, please stop and just say, okay, Lord, show me what help do I need, and I'm going to make space for it and time for it. And you'll be glad you did, I promise. So.
Yeah, Bob, I would say if you're listening to this as a leader, if there's one thing to remember nothing else than these 4 things, that leaders need champions, they need peers, they need gospel community, and they need shared leadership.
Yeah. Well, I hope this has stimulated some people to think about how they can strengthen their own leadership, just talking about the challenges and how some of those can be met through these support structures. Again, we're excited to move on to team dynamics in the next season, and we hope that you will join us for that. Let me mention some resources for our listeners. If you will look in the description of the podcast, you will see a link to a paper that I've written that explains all of these challenges and gives a little bit more detail. Also, we're going to have a webinar where you could interact with me and others who are listening. You could interact during that webinar over these challenges and what support structures look like. And so we will put a link to our Missio Nexus webinars page, and be looking on that page for the details about when that upcoming webinar will be. Thirdly, if you would like to reach out to us because you want to get into a peer group, or we can help in some other way, click on the contact link and send us your information, and we'll get back with you.
Yeah, I'd say a coach and mentor in a lot of areas, specifically cross-cultural issues, team dynamics, leader development. But also, because of that, I'm somewhat networked. I know there's 5,000-6,000 people on my contacts list on my phone. So if you have a need, and I've got people that I work with kind of on a coaching team, but because of that, we know people that do other things or maybe have a specialty in a specific country. So if you need some help or mentoring or coaching, reach out to us. Or if you just need some encouragement or need someone to pray over you, feel free to hit that contact option and say, hey, I want to talk to Scott, and we'll figure something out.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, thanks for doing this episode with me, Scott. Well, that's it for today. This has been an episode of the Field Leaders Podcast, a part of the Missio Nexus Podcast Network. And leaders, you are not alone. We are here to help you learn, grow, connect, and collaborate. God bless.
Daddy.